All right, we're coming to you live with Bet Online. Excuse me, coming to you live on YouTube. Of course, this show is presented by Bet Online. I'm Solomon Wilcots. He is Charlie Goldsmith, our Bengals insider. And Charlie, breaking news all over the place. Of course, no one really anticipated that this would get done. I think everyone here in Cincinnati, we waited with bated breath, hoping they can get Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins signed on a contract. But the numbers came out. They're going to be the highest paid wide receiver duo on a per annual basis, earning $69 million a year combined. To that, you say what?
I like the way you started because 4 months ago, literally no one, not Tee Higgins, not the Bengals, not anyone involved with the agency side or anything in the middle, nobody thought this would get done. Everybody expected that Tee Higgins' long-term future wasn't going to be with the Bengals. And of course, this day is about Ja'Marr too. He just became the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, and he deserved it. But there was never a question about whether or not Ja'Marr would get his money. There was a ton of question about where Higgins would be playing in 2025. And the story to me here is the amount that's changed with T, the way Higgins' agency change shifted a change in momentum in these negotiations, the parallel paths that Chase's negotiations and Higgins' negotiations took, all culminating into a huge organizational win last night as the Bengals secured Higgins and Chase for the next 4 years.
That's where I want to start because Rocky Arsenault is the agent that represents both Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins. We all know that Tee Higgins recently fired his previous representation and hired Rocky Arsenault. How did having the same agent for both Ja'Marr and Tee play a role in this deal getting done?
And the sense I got was this just wasn't going to get done with David Mulugheta, running Tee Higgins' camp. And you saw how rocky things got at this point last year, right before free agency started, right before Higgins went public with a trade request coming from his agency side. There was the holdout. He didn't sign the tag. Heading into OTAs. He missed mandatory mini camp. There were all these negative factors that were adding up, adding and contributing to the tension. And then the turning point for all this was, well, first, Burrow said publicly that he had a good feeling some things were in the works after the Bengals beat the Cowboys. And then a couple days later, the agency change gets public. So those are importantly and necessarily intertwined as a massive turning point for how this came through.
Well, talk to me about the motivation on the team side, because listen, there was a lot of pressure applied by Joe Burrow from the time we entered the postseason all week at the Super Bowl. Joe made it clear. He went on every show nationally and talked about the reasons why he needed not just Ja'Marr Chase, but both Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins. He seemingly, in a tacit way, was putting pressure on the organization to maybe do some things they weren't normally comfortable doing. How much of that played a role in this deal getting done? Not as we're close to training camp, but this early in the offseason cycle.
I don't think this deal happens without Joe Burrow. If the Bengals had the sixth best quarterback in the NFL, as opposed to maybe the second in Burrow, I don't have as much confidence in that. You look specifically at how, in my estimation, Tee Higgins took less than he needed to. Ja'Marr Chase signing his deal this early before, say, Micah Parsons resets the market maybe in a couple weeks, a couple months, and becomes the new highest paid non-quarterback. There was a lot of flexibility clearly coming from the other side, even though Higgins and Chase both were highly paid. And that's because when you look at what the Bengals culture is, when you look at things that people are loyal to, that starts with Joe Burrow, and that comes from Higgins and Chase's side. That also comes with, from the front office and ownership side that certainly knows and values Burrow's perspective. Burrow's involved in a lot of decisions, even the color pants they wear before games. But all that creates a system where Burrow is empowered and the Bengals act on what Burrow says, for things as trivial as that and for things as consequential as how much guaranteed money you're going to give a superstar. And all of that pays off for a moment like this when all of the Jenga pieces fit together because of the cohesion you've created.
Look, I've been around this team for nearly 40 years, going back as a player for the Cincinnati Bengals, of someone who's covered this team for more than 30 years as a broadcaster. I can't think of a time when even the great players, going back to the days of a Boomer Esiason or Carson Palmer, that a team literally listened to the player and allowed the player to, in some way, infuse himself into a negotiation with other players. I can't think of another time where it's ever happened. And look, I know Joe Burrow's the quarterback, but Boomer Esiason, he was a quarterback. He was a league MVP. Not even he could sway the Brown family into maybe doing things that they weren't comfortably doing. Why is Joe Burrow different? Why is his leadership resonating with the ownership group? And I think it's a good thing, by the way. But why is his leadership resonating maybe when in past we would not have seen things turn out this way?
I think this story starts in 2019 when, Duke Tobin's up on the podium having led the search that led to the Bengals hiring Zach Taylor. And then such an important, foundational piece of who Zach Taylor is as a head coach is collaboration for things as simple as the pass protection plan to decisions as important as these. Zach Taylor's priority since the day Burrow walked in the room was to make an environment where the Bengals were able to get the best version of Burrow by making Burrow empowered, by giving him a voice, by listening to the voice. They even let Burrow, pick which plays he likes and which plays he doesn't. And if he doesn't like the play, Zach literally crosses it out of the play sheet. Like, there's something empowering about that when your voice matters that much. And how that then trickles up is because Zach has made such a priority of having Burrow in a lot of ways be the voice of the franchise. That extends to conversations like these. And, the last thing Burrow has going for him is, he is about all the right stuff. He's the franchise of franchise quarterbacks. Yep. There is so much trust that he does the work, that he has the relationships, that he cares, like he really cares. Really and all of that gives him extra credibility in conversations like these.
Having said that, look, I think it's a new day in the Cincinnati Bengals franchise history that they have become more of, I guess the word is inclusive in terms of understanding that the morale of the players matter. And giving the quarterback, Joe Burrow, what he needs to win games, it matters. And allowing him to weigh in on what that looks like. I think, in a sense, the organization has gone outside of their comfort zone in not only in who they pay, but how much they're paying, right? At the top of the scale, you and I both know this represents a new pattern for the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think they should be commended. So with that said, we're now hearing people say, oh, you paid your quarterback, you paid your two wide receivers. They seem to be catching strays and criticism because, maybe they're paying a large majority of the salary cap, which is only 44%. By the way, towards Burrow, Chase, and Higgins, and now may not have money to pay their defensive players. To that criticism, what do you say, Charlie?
So let me tell you a story. It's week 18. The Bengals face the Steelers. And, Pittsburgh has one fantastic corner, Joey Porter Jr. And because Porter's a big guy, they put him on Higgins to start the game. Makes a lot of sense. Who do they put on Ja'Marr Chase? A guy named Corey Trice. And I'd never heard of Corey Trice. And that went exactly how you thought it would have. And then Higgins leaves the game in the third quarter late with an ankle injury. After that, they move Porter onto Chase. Doesn't shut him down, but the Bengals offense, all of a sudden, Chase isn't winning quickly and the line's falling apart in the offense shuts down. Tee Higgins' presence on the field means so much, even though he's a quote-unquote number 2 receiver. At the end of the day, what football is really about is having star players. Higgins is the type of star player who dictates matchups, who dictates which personnel teams have on the field. Sometimes teams will put a tall corner in the game off their bench just because, Higgins' height intimidates them. Mm-hmm. Higgins opens things up for Chase. Higgins statistically opens up for Andre Yoshivas, Mike Gesicki. This is the Bengals offense that should be the best passing attack in football. Their defense will spend the next 6 months talking about questions about the defense, but there is nothing about Higgins being a number 2 receiver, quote unquote, that takes away from the value and the impact he adds to the game. Because if you don't have T, literally, you're running go balls and 50-50 balls for Jermaine Burton with the season on the line, which the Bengals did a few times last year, and that's why they lost those games. So having Higgins, even though you have also Ja'Marr Chase, goes a really long way.
I'm going to say this to Cincinnati Bengals fans and to all NFL fans. If you are going to criticize this team because they decided to pay the quarterback, because they decided to pay their top 2 wide receivers, and you're sitting here saying that they can't win a Super Bowl as a result of doing it, you just don't know what you're talking about. You clearly do not understand how teams are built in the modern day of the NFL. Because I have news for you, and I have evidence. I have receipts. The team that just won the Super Bowl by the name of the Philadelphia Eagles are paying their quarterback $55 million a year, quite very close to where Joe Burrow is getting paid. They're paying their top wide receiver, A.J. Brown, $32 million a year. They're paying their second wide receiver $28 million a year, and Devontae Smith. So we're already seeing very close comparable numbers between the quarterback and the two-star receivers. And oh, by the way, they're paying their running back, Saquon Barkley, $20 million a year. Last year, he made $15 million a year. So we saw a team that had an offense where the quarterback and the two wide receivers were taking up at least a good portion of the salary cap, and they still were able to pay their offensive linemen. They're still able to pay the running back, Saquon Barkley. They're still able to pay a defense that had multiple pass rushers and a secondary and a free agent linebacker that was a finalist for the Defensive Player of the Year. So we've seen it done. Don't pretend that you know more than these teams do. And you have to look out there, I think, at the landscape of the NFL, right, Charlie, to see what other teams are doing, how they're winning, and yet they're able to pay their players and still be able to build a winning culture and a winning team.
Sometimes we make this more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah.
Pay your best players, get some stars, and draft well. Like, we can talk about takeaways from the Eagles and all the trenches and who they paid with the stars. It's like, no. They got some really, really good players. In a lot of ways, independent of the position they played. They got an unbelievable running back who is transcendent. They paid stars, and they drafted really well. The Bengals' third best player behind Ja'Marr and Burrow is Tee Higgins. I think Tee Higgins is better and will be better than Trey Hendrickson, especially because he's younger. You pay your best players, you have star game-changing talents, and then you draft well. That's the only model. That's the model. Sure, it'll be different for one team or another, what position those guys end up playing. But the Bengals happen to have two of their three best players at the same position, and there is no problem at all with having more talent at receiver than any other team in the league.
And there's a reason in today's NFL, and I'm talking the modern NFL, the old days, you know who the star player was? Your tailback. You know why? Because you ran it more than you threw it. So you had to pay your tailback. And if you was going to have a decent offensive line, you're going to have to pay your left tackle. And you had to pay the quarterback. And the star wide receiver might be the fourth best player on your offense. I remember when the Giants won a Super Bowl, they had two wide receivers. Not one of them had more than 30 receptions. But that's yesterday's NFL. In today's NFL, when we run 21 personnel with basically I should say we run 11 personnel, right? One tight end, one running back. You have three wide receivers. The ball is going to go to your number one receiver first, and then your second wide receiver. Maybe it's your tight end, like what the Patriots had when they had a star wide receiver, and then they had Gronk. But in the Bengals offense, it's going to be Ja'Marr Chase. It's going to be Tee Higgins. You don't have the star running back that ranks as that secondary option on offense. So I think it makes sense that the money is going to be divided up to Chase, to Higgins, and then so forth and so on. I want to transition to talking about Trey Hendrickson, because I do believe that the style of play that the Cincinnati Bengals play with, pass rushing is so very important. In other words, when you have an offense that scored 30 or more points in 8 of their 17 games last year. In fact, they lost 4 games last year when they scored 30 or more points. You got to be able to close out games. How do you do that when you're playing with the lead? The other team's got to throw the ball to play catch up, Charlie. So you better be able to rush the opposing team's quarterback. So after taking care of your top players on offense, next in line is going to be your pass rushers. And so help me to understand, are we close to getting a deal done with Trey Hendrickson, and why is that important?
Well, the biggest thing to happen to Trey Hendrickson this week wasn't these deals with Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins. The biggest thing to happen to Trey Hendrickson was the Bengals not investing, except for a 1-year, $7 million deal for Joseph Osai, not investing anything into players who are notable impact pass rushers. And sure, they signed B.J. Hill to a 3-year, $33 million deal. But my evaluation for him last season is he was much more valuable in the run game, and he's not as impactful as a pass rusher as he used to be. The Bengals, because they passed on all of the standout pass rushers on the market,
The Joey Bosa's of the world, right?
Not even that, Malcolm Kuntz, Deo Dangbo,
Right.
there were 20 guys, and the Bengals opted out. And put your money where your mouth is. That to me is a sign that the Bengals see themselves still in the Trey Hendrickson business for 2025.
Mm-hmm.
The Bengals have no chance to have a great pass rush this year if they, without Hendrickson, unless they trade Trey in a deal where they also get a pass rusher back. And those deals are very rare. We very rarely see one edge rusher get traded for a younger edge rusher plus a draft pick. Can the Bengals work out a deal like that? I'm sure if someone threw a perfect offer at them today, that'd be something they'd be interested in. Lucas Van Ness from the Packers in a second-round pick or something like that. I'm sure the Bengals would pick up the phone. But if it's not something like that, they have no hope of a pass rush without Hendrickson. So that keeps them much more likely to keep Trey Hendrickson in 2025.
The Bengals throw the ball more than any other offense in the NFL with Joe Burrow. And why not? He's really, I think, just last year entered into the prime of his career, to be honest with you. So they're going to continue to play this style now that they're able to keep Burrow, Higgins, and Chase together. They bring back Mike Gesicki as well. And with Chase Brown coming out of the backfield, you'd like the complementary pieces around Joe Burrow where they're going to continue to throw it. With that said, they're going to score points, and that means they better be able to rush the passer on defense. How confident are you that the Cincinnati Bengals can build? I don't know that they need a dominant defense on the other side with Al Golden, but a complementary defense on the other side with Al Golden. How confident are you?
It's possible, but I'm not confident in it. You look at the Bengals, every unit, the pass rush. Hendrickson, what an unbelievable season he had last year. Can Hendrickson be better than he was last season? Nobody's better than Trey Hendrickson was last season. And if Hendrickson isn't as good, plus you lose a starter in Sam Hubbard, who, even though he wasn't good, the Bengals haven't replaced him or upgraded over that. Because of the lack of pass rush they have as a whole, I don't see a path for this pass rush being better than it was in 2023. The Bengals at linebacker so far, all that they've done is signed a great third or fourth linebacker in Oren Burks to be their new number 2 linebacker. So the Bengals are now taking a massive chance on a guy who has never been a full-time starter. Yes, he's won a Super Bowl as a starter, but he had a lot of help around him, and he's a 30-year-old who's been a career backup. In the secondary, the Bengals cornerbacks are their best position group right now, but every one of those guys got benched, or in Dax Hill's case, tore his ACL last year. And then at safety, the Bengals kept open the possibility of upgrading over Geno Stone. Clearly, there were some questions about him, but they haven't. And now there's only one true starting free safety left on the board. Every single position group for the Bengals has questions. Now, even though the free agency well is pretty much dry, they can still address those spots in the draft. They can get a pass rusher. They probably need a rookie pass rusher. They probably need a rookie linebacker. They probably need a rookie safety. All right, so that's 3 rookies you're counting on to make an impact in 2025. Well, the Bengals haven't had 3 young defensive players make a big impact at any time over the last 3 years. So that leaves some areas where you've got to be concerned.
Yeah, I think getting a really good ball hawking, playmaking safety could help kind of cover a lot of ills. But you and I both know, I think premium is on pass rush because teams are going to be having to throw the ball a lot against the Cincinnati Bengals defense in order to keep up with the Cincinnati Bengals offense. With Burrow, Chase, and Higgins, right now, again, with their new contracts all together, they will take up 44% of the salary cap. That leaves, basically, 56% out there to go to the rest of the players, and they still have to get Trey Hendrickson under contract. I want to ask you, now that these deals are done with Chase and with Higgins, how much does that really put an expectation of not just winning, but winning a championship? I mean, Cincinnati Bengals have to be a perennial playoff team. And I think we got the window now for at least for the next 2 years is about go out and win the chip. That is now the expectation. Is that fair?
I remember we had the conversation after the first weekend of the playoffs this year. What was your takeaway from the wild card round? And I talked about this crazy backyard scramble play that Josh Allen had for a big touchdown. And I talked about the tush push and talked about Derrick Henry running all over the Steelers. All the teams that really contend have some unstoppable elements. And the Bengals' path to an unstoppable element is Burrow plus Higgins plus Chase. That in itself, and the power of this, you can walk into literally any game. You can be facing a 15-0 team on the road, and you can really feel confident in your ability to win that game. And having that, because you have the talent behind it, creates an expectation level, a standard. Also, with keeping Higgins and Chase as well, that continues a locker room expectation and standard. This was a locker room that didn't have enough leaders last year. This investment in Chase and Higgins and them reaching this stage of their careers is another sign and another moment for them to take a continued step forward as being vocal leaders on the team, raising the standards, expecting Pro Bowl caliber play, and the unbelievable work ethic that Higgins and Chase do to back that up. So certainly it raises expectations, and once the Bengals get there, they'll enter those games expecting they should win them.
See, I can hear it now. Cincinnati Bengals fans, okay, we paid everybody, now you've got to win. Like the pressure's on. I don't think the pressure's on. And I've heard it said that you don't pay players for what they've done in the past. You pay them for what they're going to do in the future. Just because a player signs a new contract, he doesn't all of a sudden become a better player. Just because he put his name on a piece of paper doesn't make him better. What you're paying for is that you're going to continue to play at the same level that you've been playing at. So there's no pressure on Burrow, Chase, and Higgins as long as they keep playing at the same level. Because I think the reason why they were paid is because their production has been so good. It's been better than most of the other players at their position. Tee Higgins, his 330 receptions over his 5 years with the Bengals, 80% of those catches have gone for a first down or a touchdown. That's the expectation. And if they continue to play at that level, they give the organization an excellent chance of winning a Super Bowl. To me, where the team has to improve is in all the other areas around what Burrow, Higgins, and Chase are doing. Again, just because you sign a new contract doesn't mean your production has to go up. Doesn't mean you have to all of a sudden become someone different than who you have been. You are expected to continue to maintain that batting average.
Couldn't agree more. This pressure isn't on Burrow, Higgins, and Chase. Let's fast forward to the podcast that we'd be having in 2029.
Yeah.
And whether or not the Bengals, let's say, for example, the Bengals haven't won a Super Bowl and it's 2029. What we are going to be saying on that day is the Bengals let Burrow, Chase, and Higgins down.
There you go.
That's the talking point. If the Bengals don't get this, the pressure's on the front office, on the coaching staff, on the young players around them. Now your Miles Murphys and Jordan Battles to step forward, your Cam Taylor-Britts. Yeah. And if the Bengals don't get this done, we're going to talk about the missed opportunity because you had Burrow and Chase and Higgins.
Really great stuff from you, Charlie. Have one last question. If you had your way to add one critical piece, last year we saw a Philadelphia Eagle team go out and add one critical piece. That piece was Saquon Barkley. Now, he was available, right? He could be had for cheap because the New York Giants didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what they had in Saquon Barkley, clearly, because they gave him away for free. They got no compensation for him while he went to a division rival, for crying out loud. If you could add one piece to the Cincinnati Bengals roster that you think would make the biggest difference, okay, what would that piece be?
I just talked about how concerned I am about the pass rush. The offensive guard spot is so bad that I'm not even going to say a pass rusher. I wish I could say a pass rusher. I wish they'd have addressed guard to the point where I could say a pass rusher, but that's not the world they live in because they've failed to go out and add the types of quality plug-and-play guards that are available. The only guy who I would see as a fit going forward for them who's still available on the free agent market is Brandon Scherf, and he's 33 years old and has played a lot of snaps and is available for a reason. Guys like him usually aren't available at this point of the offseason more than a week into free agency, so that's certainly notable. The fact that the Bengals next season could be missing Alex Kappa, who allowed more sacks than any other interior offensive lineman in the league last year, that's concerning. The Bengals are one guard away from being the best offense in football. They got to get that, whether it's Scherf, is there some sort of low-level trade or a cap casualty cut on the way that they could do to really solidify one of those guard spots? That's something the Bengals desperately need.
I could see them targeting that position at the high end of the draft. Most people don't take guards in the first round, but where they're selecting, maybe they might do it at 17, somewhere in there. If that guy is really special, then you got to be able to do it. I think you could target the draft, take one of these tackles, move them inside. We saw Mekhi Becton do it last year for the Philadelphia Eagles, helped them win a Super Bowl. He's available as we sit here and have a conversation right now, Charlie.
Yeah, certainly. I don't think Mekhi Becton is the fit, but is there a tackle who could slide inside? Mm-hmm. That's something, especially in the draft. That's definitely a path I'd look. Maybe it's a guy who plays guard for his first 2 years, and then Orlando Brown when his contract expires. Hopefully Orlando's a Bengal for a long time. He's a great player, but then you have another option to maybe replace him at the long run in left tackle.
He certainly is a team guy. There's no doubt about it. You could see that happening. I got to believe with all the linemen that you have, because we have really good tackles who can kick down and play guard. It's not like you're looking for the Rosetta Stone here, right? You're looking for a good guard. I'm not making light of what it is they do. I think what they do is not very easy. But if you told me that, man, I'm trying to find a position that really there's a plethora of those players that can get that done. You're not talking the tip of the spear when it comes to overall athleticism. That would be if you were looking for a tackle. You're not looking for a shutdown corner. You're not looking for a quarterback. We're talking about an interior offensive guard, for crying out loud. If we can, Scott Peters, hey, you're on the clock, my friend. He's the Bengals' new offensive line coach. You know that. He'll weigh heavily in on who that player is and what it's going to look like based on his model for what he deems to be important. A lot of eyeballs are on our new offensive line coach also, right? To help this group get better quick. Is that right?
And now when they hired him, something that got stressed to me was he does have a good track record of taking low-level picks, even some undrafted free agents, some straight free agent types, and turning them into usable offensive linemen. But I don't want, I'd rather be having that conversation about the depth. I wouldn't rather be having that conversation about needing that from your starters. You don't want to have to turn nothing into something as a starter, but maybe that's just the world the Bengals are in right now. And if that's the case, we'll be talking about that all season.
Good stuff, Charlie Goldsmith. We greatly appreciate you stopping by to lend your expertise. It's going to be a fun week. This offseason is already cooking. We haven't even started to dive into the draft because free agency and this time of year has been so very important and critical as to what you and I have all been saying and everyone's been saying is one of the most important off seasons for the Cincinnati Bengals in quite some time. We want to wish them congratulations, the same to Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins, and mostly to Joe Burrow, because he's got his friends to throw to, guys who already has chemistry with and didn't try to bring some new players in to get that done. We want to thank you for joining us. Don't forget to join us next time, everyone.